we're on now. We uh just what happened? Okay. Let's wait for some people coming. Um 13 ሰዎች አሉ። እሺ የሚሰማ ከሆነ ንገሩን። Dr. J is with us today. Everyone, welcome Jay with us in our show. It's very interesting to have you. My favorite, very amazing person, bright mind. Jay, welcome to our show.
Thanks, Abimelech. It's good to be here with you. It's fascinating. I'm here way over in the United States. It's a little after 2 o'clock in the afternoon. It's 9 o'clock in the evening where you are, I'm assuming, there in Ethiopia. And here it's almost like we're next door. We're in the same room. It's terrific to have this kind of technology to be able to then talk about important subjects, but also to bring in the gospel.
I mean, that's right. Okay. Before we start to our today's topic, can you please tell us about yourself? I mean, how did you start criticizing Islam and all your background?
Well, I won't go into too much detail because otherwise I'd be here for a whole hour. I was born and grew up in India. Parents are Mish kids. My parents are missionaries. I'm a Mish kid. My father was also a Mish kid. And so we've been in India for, since 1913. So that's over 100 years. Our family's been in India as missionaries. So I've grown up with Muslims all around because I come from northern India. And in northern India, we have almost 200 million Muslims now. It's the third largest Muslim country on earth. You don't think of India as being Muslim because there's 800 million Hindus. But in northern India, we were surrounded by Muslims. I had roommates that were Muslims. I had classmates that were Muslims. And so having that background, in some ways, I don't have a fear of Islam. I really engage with Muslims. I've always done it my whole life. But it was not until 1981, which shows my age. I was at seminary and I went to a one-day seminar on Islam. And I was told at that time in 81 that there were 800 million Muslims. Huge number. Couldn't really compute a number like that. But then I was given two new numbers that really bothered me. One was that there were only 1,500 missionaries working amongst the 800 million Muslims, and that this 1,500 only made up 2% of all missionaries. And it was at that point I turned to my wife and I said, we've got to work with Islam. So that's 81. We're talking almost 40 years ago that we have been working with Islam. So for the last 40 years, I have been engaging with Islam. I have been in Senegal, West Africa with my wife for 5 years. I've been in London engaging with about 1 million Muslims there for 25 years. And now I'm back here in the United States for the last 3 years. And what I've been doing is I've been primarily, Abimelech, I am primarily what you call a polemicist. I confront Islam. I confront really the foundations of Islam, the Quran and Muhammad and the emergence of Islam. I do a historical critique. That's my area of expertise. That's one of the reasons why you called me to talk to me about it today. So that's my background. Almost 40 years of working and engaging with Muslims. I absolutely love them. They're the most exciting people to work with because they're so passionate, and I love their passion. I'm jealous of their passion. And I also find that the Muslims, more than anybody else, are would love to talk about things I want to talk about. They want to talk about Jesus. They want to talk about the Bible. What two better things can you talk about than those two? And so I like to talk about Jesus and the Bible, but I also like to, at the same time, confront Muhammad and the Quran, like with like. So much of what I do is in those four areas: Jesus and the Bible, Muhammad and the Quran.
That's interesting. Dr. J. So tell me what's role in P Funder. You have P Funder website that was coming up. I have seen it only in the last 3 days. I didn't know there was a P Funder website. I used to use debate.com. So what's role in P Funder?
Now, Fander is the name of the man who I have borrowed. Dr. Carl Fander. The way they say it's a German name, that's why it has a P before the F, but it's pronounced Fander. It's he was one of the in fact he was one of the first to ever confront Islam using the Islamic traditions back in the 1800s. So we're talking almost 200 years ago. He was he got his doctorate in Britain, and then he went to the Caucasus, and then he went to Baghdad, and then he went across over to India, and he went to Calcutta, and to spent a lot of time in Agra in central India, and then went up to Peshawar after that, and then ended back up in Baghdad. And in all of that time, he learned 7 different languages. He was an enormous academic, and confronted the traditions. That means he confronted the Sirah because he knew Arabic, so he read the original, translated them, and brought them into German and English. Confronted the Hadith, the sayings of Muhammad. Confronted the Tafsir, the commentaries against about the Quran, and confronted the Tahriq, as well as confronting the Quran. So he spent his whole ministry doing what I'm doing now, or I might say I'm doing what I am now because of what he did. He is my model. So we have borrowed his name and the Fander website, which actually Abimelech, I'm just getting next week. It's not mine. It belongs to the team I left behind in the United Kingdom. They're now giving it to me, and they moved into a whole new area of direction. So I'm going to be Fander Man after this next week. But I have Fander Films. Fander Films are on YouTube. Pfander Films, Films on YouTube. And the Fander Films I'm putting up almost a video almost every day now. Every day or every other day on this whole historical critique because of the lockdown, because of the pandemic that's happening, I'm sure in Ethiopia, it's happening all over the world. Many people are at home, and as a result, they're looking, and they're saying, could you please get as many videos up as possible? So I am busier now than I've ever been in my life because I have to research every one of those videos. I then have to write up what I research. I then have to record what I write up, and then I have to edit what I record, and then I have to upload them onto YouTube, and then I have to respond to the accusations and as you well know, Abimelech and Daniel, I get an enormous amount of accusations from the Muslims and from those who don't like what I'm doing with this material. But it's fascinating to me. We're bringing Muslims to Jesus Christ because of these videos, because of this new material, especially because of this historical critique. So Fander is the man whose name I have borrowed. He is the man whose ministry I now model after mine. And he is the one who wrote a book called Mizan al-Haq, which means balance of truth in the 1800s, that in the Indian subcontinent brought more Muslims to Jesus Christ than any other one book. And that book, if you read it, you will see it's all about confronting Muhammad, defending Jesus Christ, confronting the Quran, defending the Bible, the book of the man, the book of the man, the book of the man. That's my phrase. But he was doing what I do. I confront the book and I confront the man, and I give the antidote, the only antidote, which is a better book, a bigger book, and the better antidote, Jesus Christ.
Perfect. So when we criticize Islam, some people comes up and they say, "Oh, it's not good to criticize Islam. It's just why don't you preach the gospel by itself? It can stand by itself, the gospel." So tell us why it's important to criticize Islam.
Okay, and what you're doing, Daniel, you're looking at 2 different areas of expertise that we have in both Muslims and Christians. It's fascinating that Muslims say this without looking and asking, What do they do with the Bible? Are they always criticizing the Bible? Absolutely. Do they always criticize Jesus Christ? In fact, you hardly get into a conversation with a Muslim without them at some point, once they find you're a Christian, confronting Jesus and confronting the Bible. So they have no problem being critical of our text and be critical of our God. Now, that's called polemics. Polemics is the art of going on the offense. Apologetics would be the art of defense. So in fascinating, we as Christians, and what your Muslims telling is, don't do polemics, only do apologetics. That's what they're saying. Do not criticize our Quran. Do not criticize our Prophet Muhammad. Have you ever heard a Muslim say that? I'm sorry, excuse me, put it on. Have you ever heard a Christian say that? Have you ever heard a Christian say, don't criticize Jesus and don't criticize my Bible?
No.
Never. In
Yes.
2,000 years, we have allowed
Christian will
everybody.
never say that.
In 2,000 years, we've always put our Bible up to scrutiny. In fact, we're the only ones that really have put our Bible to scrutiny. That's called historical criticism. Historical criticism is biblical criticism. Redacted criticism, source criticism, all the different criticisms that come under the umbrella of historical criticism were all created because of this book. What's fascinating to me is when Muslims who are more than ready to use those criticisms and attack my Bible using polemics, that's called polemic, going on the offense, and they criticize the manuscripts, they criticize the corruption, they criticize the supposed historical anachronisms or the scientific errors, all these supposed problems with the Bible, they have no problem doing that. But as soon as we ask the same questions of the Quran, immediately they get all upset and they call us hate preachers and they call us Islamophobes. When I would suggest that Muslims need to be careful, because it is the polemics against the Quran that is destroying Islam. The polemics against the Bible have made the Bible stronger. And in the last 100 years, we have found response to every one of the questions that were posed in the 1800s. Remember, this has been going on since the 1800s. But people like Wellhausen, the school in Tübingen in Germany, has been criticizing the Bible, the documentary hypothesis, what we know as redacted criticism, that much of the New Testament was redacted back from the 4th century onto this people named Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. And who is Paul? We don't even know anything about him. So this is called redacted criticism, source criticism, that many of the stories in the Bible have come from other sources, have come from pagan sources. This is the criticism that I had to study in seminary, and we have now found answers to every one of them. Now we're applying the very same criticism to this book, the Quran. And we're asking the same question, which is a historical question, which is a neutral question, which is a question everybody should ask of every religion, of every revelation, because every revelation from every religion makes the same claims. That in fact, this book makes many more claims than our Bible makes. This book makes much greater claims to authority and credibility. This book makes the claim in chapter 85, verse 22, that it is eternal. Our Bible doesn't make that claim. This book claims that it has always existed on these eternal tablets that were then sent down over a period of 22 years between 610 and 632 to a man named Muhammad. Our Bible doesn't make that kind of claim. Our Bible was not sent down. Our Bible was written by man. This book makes the claim that it was not written by man, that it's untouched by human hands, that when it was sent down, it was then compiled in 652 by a man named Zayd bin Thabit under the authority of a man, the caliph called Uthman, and that for 1400 years, nothing has changed. That everything you read in this book, everything you read in the text here, the Arabic text, not the English translation, but the Arabic text, exactly that every sentence, every surah, every ayah, every word, every letter, even every dot, according to many Muslims, is exactly like it is in that eternal tablet that is in heaven. Now, have you heard any Christian make a claim like that about the Bible?
Never.
Never.
So
never.
This idea of we should not criticize the Quran, where is that coming from? When they're the first to criticize the Bible. But see, here's the great thing about Malek. The criticisms that we're making against the Quran are absolutely neutral criticisms. This is not a Christian polemic. I'm not saying as a Christian, I demand this, because I find it in my Bible. I'm asking a most neutral question. I'm asking, is it true? That's all I'm asking. Can you prove to me that, since you're making the claim, not me, I'm not making this claim, that this book was sent down to a man named Muhammad over a period of 22 years, from 610 to 632, was written down in its final form in 652, during the time of Uthman. Therefore, this book should be complete by the time of Uthman, right? That's all. You're making that claim, not me. So I want you to show me that manuscript. Because remember, Uthman then sent it out to every province. We know there were 9 provinces: Basra, Baghdad, Damascus, Jerusalem, Cairo, Alexandria, Aden, Herat, and Nishapur. 9 different provinces. That means there should be 9 different Qurans that existed from the time of 652. Every one of those cities, except for Jerusalem, every one of those cities have always been in Muslim hands. They're still in Muslim hands today. There's no reason why you cannot find 9 manuscripts. Show me one. Just show me one. From the mid-7th century, that's 652, that's 114 surahs, that's exactly like this book that I have here, exactly like what I see in the Arabic here. And Muslims cannot even come up with one. None from 652. Oh, they can't even come up with one from the 7th century. In fact, they can't come up with a complete manuscript of any Quran from the 8th, 9th, or 10th century. So when was this book finally compiled? Ooh, wait till we get to that question. Anyways, back to you. Can you see this whole idea that we must not
But
confront the
Muslims
Quran,
claim,
that we must stick to the Bible? I like to see if they're going to do that with our Bible, but they can't. As soon as they open their mouth, they have to confront the Bible. They have to confront Jesus Christ. God bless them for doing that, but then give us the freedom to do the same.
yeah, but Muslims claim they have exactly the same like Muhammad's time, the book like Muhammad's time, and exactly like on the table, on the tablet of on heaven, like beside Allah or somewhere else. So is it true they have the same like book with Muhammad and the same with the time of Muhammad and Allah with what is it called, the tablet, eternal tablet? Do they
I'm
have
sorry.
a same book?
I'm sorry. Of the time of Muhammad or the time of Uthman?
The time of, yeah, it's collected like in the time of Usman, but they say
let me phrase the question like this.
all right, okay.
Please, Dr. J, can you tell us a brief history of the Quran and what we can learn about the textual history of the Quran from Islamic sources? So from the beginning, what can we learn from the Islamic sources about the textual history of the Quran?
Okay, now you're
But
asking me a
before,
question.
yeah,
Daniel, let me just make sure I got your question right.
Okay.
Because if you're asking me from Islamic tradition, that's the classical account. I don't believe in the Islamic tradition. The classical account is my problem. I don't trust the classical account. If you want from Islamic tradition, I'll tell you what the Islamic tradition says. The Islamic tradition is found in Al-Bukhari. Al-Bukhari is the compiler, the first and most important compiler of what they know as the Hadith, the sayings of Muhammad. And in 870, between 850 and 870, he wrote volume 6, Hadith number 509 and 510. So that's volume 6, Hadith number 509 and 510, which is the best and really the most comprehensive statement we have as to how the Quran was compiled. And this is what he said. This is what the Hadith of Al-Bukhari says. He says that in 632, 634, the 2 years after Muhammad died in 632, 2 years after that, there was a battle in Yamama, and many of those who had memorized the Quran died in that battle. Abu Bakr, who is the caliph at that time, along with Umar, who will come after him, had Zayd ibn Thabit, that's the secretary of Muhammad. They brought him into the room there in the palace there where he was ruling, and they asked him to compile the Quran, because all those who had memorized it, many of them, we know about 70. We only know about 70 who had died at the Battle of Yamama, that they had died, and because they had died, the Quran would die with them. So they needed it written down. So much for memorization. When Muslims say it was memorized, show them what Al-Bukhari is saying. It could not be memorized, because if it's memorized, those who memorized it were dying, and they were dying in large numbers, 70 in the one battle. So they had to write it down. That's why you have to have a written text. So Abu Bakr asked Zayd ibn Thabit, the secretary of Muhammad, to write it down. His first response is, how can I do something that the Prophet never did? Proving that it was not written down during the time of Muhammad. Okay? Nonetheless, he relents, and he goes to the remaining people who had memorized it, the Sahabas, those who were the companions of the Prophet, And he got it from their memory. He got it from bones. He got it from stones. He got it from bark. So he just went all over the place, putting it together and put it into one final text. That was the text of Abu Bakr. That text was then given to Hafsa, one of the wives of Muhammad, the daughter of Umar. She puts it under her bed for 20 years. Why in the world would you put it under your bed? Nonetheless, she puts it under her bed and leaves it. 20 years later, Abu Bakr has died. Umar has been killed. Uthman is now caliph. He becomes caliph in 646. In 652, people come to him. Khuzaimah comes to him and says, what are we going to do? There are many different Qurans, and we don't want to happen to the Quran what has happened to the Bible. Therefore, we need to make sure that we get one Quran. So Uthman orders Zayd ibn Thabit to take Hafsa's copy, which she had been hiding under her bed. Now can you see why there were so many different Qurans? Because no one bothered to read it. They left it there for 20 years. She's to bring it out, so she gives it to Zayd ibn Thabit. He, along with Zubair, Alas, and Hisham, 4 of them were to rewrite the Quran. Hold on a minute. Why do you rewrite it if it's already written? Do you see the problem?
Mm-hmm.
Nonetheless, according to Al-Bukhari, he was to rewrite the Quran, and he was to rewrite it in the Qurayshi dialect. Now, do any of you, Abamalek or Daniel, do you speak or read or write Arabic?
No, we don't. We don't speak Arabic, but we have a lot of friends speaking Arabic.
But we understand how Arabic works.
Okay, but you do know that in order to read a written text, in order to read that Arabic, you have to have dots and you have to have vowels. Am I correct?
Yeah, dialects. Yeah.
Yes, right.
These are dialectical. These are dialectical. So in order to read it in one dialect from one to another dialect, there are many dialects within Arabic. For in the Arabic text, the original Arabic text, the consonantal text, the skeletal text had no dots. In the 7th century, there were no dots. There was no vowels. The Dhamma, the Kasra, the Fatha did not exist that early. So if Uthman is saying that he wants it written in the Qurayshi dialect, how can you write it in the Qurayshi dialect? How can you write a dialectical difference if there's no dots and no vowels? Can you see the problem here?
Yeah.
Yes.
This makes no sense. But then who's writing this? Al-Bukhari is writing this. When did he write it? In the 870s. 870 is the late 9th century. That's 240 years later. Can you see? This is what Al-Bukhari thought must have happened. He assumed that there were dialectical differences. He assumed that there was dots and vowelization. So that's why he's saying, make sure you write it in the Qurayshi dialect. That's the next problem. So they do. So Zayd ibn Thabit, along with the other 3, write it in the Qurayshi dialect, and they give it to Uthman. And then what does Uthman do next? Well, according to Al-Bukhari, he takes all the other Qurans which disagreed. That means they have to be written, right?
Mm-hmm.
And burn them.
They have to.
You burn text. You don't burn oralization. You don't burn memorization. This has to be a text. Can you see the problem? He burned everything that disagreed. And if you burn something, that means these are manuscripts that you burn. You don't burn someone's memory. You don't burn someone who has a different oral or a different dialect of reading. You can't burn people. Well, you can, but not to get rid of the dialect. You are burning the manuscripts. And it says so very clearly in Al-Bukhari. He burned every manuscript that disagreed with the one that Zayd ibn Thabit had just produced. Does that not tell you that from the very beginning, there has been a manipulation? From the very beginning, I'm just using Islamic tradition now. This is the Islamic tradition that Daniel asked me to use. From the Islamic tradition standpoint, this is a real problem because it shows from the very beginning, there was human intervention. This is not a book that comes from God, unfettered with human hands. From the very beginning, we can see that humans controlled it, that the caliph wanted to eradicate anything that disagreed with it, and that's why he burned everything that disagreed. Now, what he does next then is he takes that one model, that one copy, and he sends it to every province. Now, historically, from the tradition standpoint, many Muslims have always assumed there was only 4 copies. One was left in Medina, one was sent to Basra, one was sent to Baghdad, and one was sent to Damascus. Fine, I will go with the 4 copies. What we do know, however, it says in Al-Bukhari that he sent it to every province. Just look at the province. I've already named them. Basra, Baghdad, Damascus, Jerusalem, Cairo, Alexandria, Aden, Herat, and Nishapur. That is 9 provinces. So it's not just 4 manuscripts that were sent out. It's 9 manuscripts that were sent out. Now, that's what the Islamic traditions, Daniel tells us. I have a problem. You can see I'm already come up with problems, those Islamic traditions. First and foremost, those Islamic traditions are written too late. They're written 200 to 300 years later. Secondly, even if you trust the Islamic traditions, where are those 9 copies? I've asked for 20 years, 40 years, to show me one copy of one Quran from the mid 7th century, from 652, from the time of Uthman. Now we're going to switch gears. And if you want me, I'll then go into the historical critique, what historians are finding with the Quran, because this is where the rubber hits the road, and this is where Muslims are going to get angry. Because I don't trust the Islamic traditions, but already just introducing the Islamic traditions, can you see that there are problems within those traditions that Muslims have never answered? I've never seen a Muslim answer and respond to those difficulties concerning even their own traditions. But I'm going to go beyond that now. And what I would like to do, if your permission, Abba Malek and Daniel, is to ask, what are the historians finding out with the Quran? But I'll leave it up to you.
Before that, I want to ask about the so-called seven ahrufs. You know, whenever we mention different versions of the Quran, actually we learned about this from you, Dr. J. Thank you so much for bringing out those hidden Qurans. So whenever we mention about these Qurans, the common answer the Muslims give us is that these are only the 7 Arabic dialects, and they are called ahrufs, and they are not more than that, because these are not corruptions, because these differences were there during the time of Muhammad. How true is that?
Daniel, you've asked a brilliant question, and you're bringing something that, and I'm so glad you brought it up, Daniel. Thanks for doing this. When you hear this, that these are nothing more than 7 ahruf, first of all, where does that story come from? Where does that question come from? It comes from al-Bukhari again. When did al-Bukhari die? 870. So this is a question that al-Bukhari, remember, al-Bukhari was given 600,000 of these akhbars, and then he was told to whittle them down to just that which was authentic. He took his time for 20 years and whittled them down, throwing out 98% of those akhbars he threw out, those sayings he threw out, and only retained 2%. He only retained 7,397 out of 600,000. So everything that the Muslims are going to come to you about how the Quran was written are from those 7,397, just 2% of what he retained. What's interesting to me is, in his desire to get rid of everything he considered, now remember, it was very subjective, only he decided what was good, what was bad. One man, 240 years after Muhammad, decides what's good and what's bad. Can you see the difficulty?
Wow.
Now, what he threw out, 98%, I would like to see, because what we do know of the 2%, he says that there were 7 ahruf. That's one of these traditions coming. That comes from al-Bukhari. It does not come from the 7th century. It does not come from the 8th century. It comes from the late 9th century, 240 years later. Now, if that is the case, I want to ask anybody who is going to support that to show me what ahruf means, or qira'at is the other word they use. What does ahruf and qira'at mean? Well, ahruf and qira'at means readings. Readings is the way you read the text depending on your dialect. Now remember, at the time when this was written down by al-Bukhari, there were 7 major dialects that were well known. And at that time, every one of those dialects was being written down because at that time they had dots and they had vowelizations. In order to have a reading in a written text, you have to have diacritical marks, which are the dots above and below the line, and you have to have vowelization. Here's the problem. If the dots enormously change the meaning of a word, let me just give you an example. If I just took a smiley face, right? Just one smiley face. That's 1 letter in Arabic. No, it's not. It's actually 5 letters. Wow. How do I know? Because just with 1 smiley face, if I put a dot above it, it becomes a nun. If I put 2 dots above it, it becomes a ta. If I put 3 dots above it, it becomes a tha. Na, ta, tha. If I put 1 dot below it, it becomes a ba. If I put 2 dots below it, it becomes a ya. So just with 1 smiley face, 1 little bowl-shaped character in Arabic, I could have na, ta, tha, ba, ya, 5 different letters. In the 7th century, none of those dots existed. So in the 7th century, when you read that smiley face along with others, because every Arabic word has 3 of these letters, There are 28 of these letters in Arabic now, but those 28 didn't exist in the time of the 7th century, because those 28 letters include dots above and below the line to delineate it, including these 5 just with one smiley face. So I know I'm getting a lot of you confused, but can you understand? You cannot have a dialectical difference in a written text that would create ahruf or kirat until the 9th century, which is exactly when this reference is put in there, and when the stories about Muhammad hearing this dialect and hearing that dialect and saying that 7 are okay. In the oral form, yes, 7 are okay, but not in a written text. So it had to be written down. So what happens? Well, you have many different schools. We know of 5 major schools in the 9th century, one in Basra, one in Baghdad, one in Damascus, one in Medina, and one in, what was the 5th one? Damascus, Medina, Basra, and I can't remember where the 5th one was.
That's all right.
Mecca, sorry. One was in Mecca and one was Medina. So 2 are in Saudi Arabia, 2 are in Iraq, and 1 is in Syria. All right. Those are the 5 major locations. They had students in the 9th century. In the 9th century, the end of the 8th century, moving into the 9th century, they had students, about 39 different students that we've been able to count, that put together their own text, their own way of putting where they want the dots in. And there were thousands, tens of thousands of differences. We have already collected 36 of those different texts. Hatun Tash, who is my colleague in London, has bought 36 of the 39. We've already found 36. They're in London. Just by looking at 23 of them, we've not even had a chance to look at all of them. Just by looking at 23 of them, we've come up with 93,000 differences between those 23 different texts, different ahruf, different Qira'at. So this idea of Qira and ahruf only came into play in the 9th century. This was not a problem in the 7th century because there was no dots. There was no vowelization. Ahruf and Qira'at only make sense once you create those dots. And then once you create those dots, then you have students putting those dots wherever they want to and having, no, this is it kitaba or kitabu, is it kitabin, they can put it where they want depending on the context or what they consider the context. Hatun Tash and I took this down to Speaker's Corner in 2015 and 2016, and we held up just 26 of them for all the Muslims to see. They went berserk. They went angry. They almost didn't let us leave the corner that Sunday. They wanted those Qurans in their hands because they did not want us to go with them. They had never seen examples of 26 different Qurans. And in those 26 different Qurans, we didn't tell the crowd, but there are already 93,000 differences. That's just, we're getting started. We're going to find hundreds of thousands probably of differences once we get through all the derivations that we've been able to get our hands on. Does that help you, or do you want to come back on that?
Oh yeah, that's very interesting. So I want to ask you again about how this 93,000 you said, right?
93,000 differences in the Qira'at and the ahruf between these just 23 of the 36 we now have.
Yeah. So these things are like just the differences, or can make these things change the meaning of the Quran itself?
Hatun and I, after we did this at Speaker's Corner, and if you go up on Fander Films, you will see, go and look at what we did the very next day. We went into the Fander studio, into the Fander office, and then we looked at just 70. We just chose 70 out of the 93,000. We just chose 70 because we didn't have time. And we showed in every case, if you have a word here that has one set of dots and you have another word in the same sentence that has another set of dots, just the changing of one word will change the entire sentence. Not only will it change the entire sentence, it changes the entire meaning. Not only does it change the meaning, it changes the theology. So depending on whose you're going to go with, you can see an entire theological position could be made or unmade. That is why in 1924, look at the date, 1924, not even 100 years ago, they were having problems in Cairo, in Egypt. In Cairo, just the city, their Department of Education was having difficulty because the students, the high school students, were sitting for standardized tests, and they were coming back with many different answers to Quranic questions. Questions about, what does the Quran say about this? What does the Quran say about that? And they were responding with completely different answers. And they realized the reason why they had so many different answers because they had so many different Qurans that had different ahruf and different kirat in the written text. See, can you see why they had a problem? So they had to standardize it to one Quran, just one Quran. And they went to Al-Azhar University, the most prestigious university in the world, for the Muslim world. And they asked a man named Muhammad ibn al-Husayni al-Haddad, that's his name, Muhammad ibn al-Husayni al-Haddad, in 1924 to choose amongst the 39, which was the standard one, which was the one he would choose. And he chose just one called Hafs. Hafs was a student who died in 796. So he was from Kufa in Iraq, what is today Iraq. He wasn't even from Saudi Arabia. He wasn't from Mecca or Medina. He wasn't from the Arab world. He was from the Persian world. He was a Persian. He was this is during the Abbasid era. So he was the one that it was his text, which was written in 796. Muhammad died in 632. The Quran was canonized in 630, 652, right? This is 796. Are you seeing the problem?
Long time.
This is over 200 years later. He chose that one text for the schools in Cairo, just for one city. They took all the other Qurans they could find, they took them out into a boat, and they threw them into the Nile. Now, did that get rid of those Qurans?
So which one is the real Quran out of all these 26?
Hey, hold on a minute, Abimelech. What happened next? Once they had one Quran that all the students could use in the high schools of Cairo, they now were able to have standardized text because they get the same answers, they get the same meaning, they get the same theology. Because it was so successful to choose just one Quran that had only one derivation, that only had one theology, they decide to make that Quran, the Hafs Quran, for all of Egypt in 1936. This is 1936, not 1924 now. It took them another 12 years to finally make it for all of Egypt. So that was just good for Egypt. So Egypt was ahead of the rest of the world. They made one Quran in 1936 called the Hafs Quran. In Saudi Arabia, they saw what was happening in Egypt, and they realized we need to do this for the whole world. We need to have one Quran that has the same diacritical marks, that has the same vowelization, that has the same ahruf, that has the same qira'at for the whole world, so we won't have all these different answers, so we won't have all these different theologies, so we won't have all these different disputes on what the Quran means, because remember, a good 20% of the Quran, even the scholars don't understand. And so they decided in 1985, look at the date, 1985, to make the Hafs text as the standard text for the whole world. Now, I was living in 1985. Maybe you were living in 1985. I don't know your age. But that makes me older than the Quran. So the Quran, this book that I have in my hand today, has only been standardized in the last 35 years. Ooh,
too young.
This is only a book that's been around for 35 years. Because there were 38 other Qurans that have been around for 1,400 years. Did I say 14? 1,200 years, because the Qira'at in the Ahruf is a 9th century problem. It's an 8th and 9th century creation. Because because the Arabic, when it was first formed, didn't have dots, didn't have vowelization. And here's my question. God, in his wisdom, if he was going to provide the greatest revelation, the seal of all revelation, why would he provide it in a language that could not accommodate it, when he already had Hebrew and Greek that he used earlier? Of course, obviously, you know the answer. He's not my God. And obviously, he didn't understand the written text. And obviously, he must have only speak one language. And that language was too crude, too barbaric in the 7th century to even accommodate it. That's why it took another 100 to 200 years to finally create the Quran as it was today. But then there were so many disagreements. That's where the Qira'at and Ahruf come out. There were thousands of disagreements, 93,000 that we've counted already, that they finally had to put only down to one text. And that was in 1924 in Cairo, 1936 in Egypt, and 1985 for the whole world. In Saudi Arabia, and it's called the Ibn Saud text, because it was the King Ibn Saud who then canonized it in 1985.
All right, okay. So
I mean, that's 25 years ago, not 35.
one guy is here in the comment asked, what is the difference between Ahruf and Qira'at?
No difference.
And
if you have any Muslim, you ask them, they'll give you as many Muslims that they'll give you that many different answers. Basically, it's the way you read the text. If you have the consonantal text, you have to read it somehow. You need to put dots above and below it. So the different dots, the different schools, the different students, these are about 39 different students, had a different way to read it. And that's what Qira'at is. It's the same thing for Ahruf reading. So reading is a 9th century problem, not a 7th century problem.
All right, okay. So
Now, can you see why I'm saying that? I'm emphasizing that about Malek and Daniel, because most Muslims think that when we're talking about the corruption of the Quran, that we're only talking about ahruf and kirat. We're not talking about ahruf and kirat. We're talking about something even more damaging than ahruf and kirat. We're not talking about how you read it. We're talking about the written text, the consonantal, skeletal razm, as it's known in Arabic. That's what we're really talking about. We haven't even got into that yet. Wait till we get into that. Then you're going to see how easily you can destroy the Quran.
yeah, so they when they talk about Kirat and separated Kirat and Ahruf, they're agreeing that these books are different. They have this different books around the world. But they say at the same time, they say they don't have any difference around the world. And at the same time, they say, oh, it's only Kirat and Ahruf is the difference. So they agreeing there is a difference. So which one is on eternal tablet? Which Ahruf, which Kirat is eternal tablet?
Well,
Well, which one is on eternal tablet?
Ababala, can you see the problem with even your question? Which is on the eternal tablets? Remember, if they're eternal, there was no diacritical marks on the eternal tablets. There was no vowelization on the eternal tablets. So none of these, including Hafs, is not on the eternal tablets because that was created by man. The dots, the diacritical marks, and the vowelizations were introduced in the 8th and 9th century by men, by Arabs, so that they could read it for themselves. So none of these dots, none of these vowelizations are on the eternal tablets.
That's really amazing because they believe it's eternal tablet at the same time, and it's amazing because in the Quran it says in Surah chapter 94 it talks about Muhammad's personal life experience. Surah 111, his uncle Abu Halab. It talks about Abu Halab. Surah 6:4 it talks about he won his son's wife. He wanted to take his wife. So the Quran itself, it talks about personal life. So it can't be from God, like eternal God, real God, like in on eternal tablet, because it's we see the Quran is personal experience of Muhammad. So it cannot be from Allah, I think, from God. So let's see the collection of Quran. Why it's needed to be collected in the book, in a single book. Let's see that. Like, let's go back to that.
Why does it need to be collected?
Yeah, why is it meant to be collected in one single book?
Well, Al-Buhari answers that very quickly. He says,
Yeah.
because there are so many different books that disagree. So you've got to make ones and throw and destroy all the others.
Yeah, but well, what about in Usman Abu Bakr's time? He just he was collecting the book. He didn't see it was easy to collect it. Why he said it's not easy to collect the Quran?
Because in 22 years of receiving the revelation from 610 to 632, Muhammad never collected it. Muhammad never had it written down. Muhammad only had people memorize it. Because this idea that memorization is better than the written text. The problem with memorization is you can memorize, many people will memorize different things. And therefore, how do you standardize memorization, especially when it starts proliferating, goes into not just tens, but hundreds, not just hundreds, but thousands, not to thousands, but millions. When millions have to start memorizing it, they're going to memorize it differently depending on what they've heard. That's the problem with oral tradition. As you well know, you can do this even in a birthday party. When you start with one person, tell them something in their ear, they tell the next person, they tell the next person, they tell the next person. By the time it gets over here 15 minutes later, to the 12th person, what the 12th person tells you and what the first person tells you are two different things. If that can happen in a context of 15 minutes, can you imagine what happens over 1,400 years of memorization? Memorization is always open to corruption, especially if it's not written down. That's why we write everything down. That's why we have receipts. Whenever we have an exchange of goods, you write a receipt down so you can be held accountable for what you have given and what you've received. We would not be able to survive without the written text. And that's why Abu Bakr in 632, when all those who had memorized it died in the battle, 70 died in the battle, he realized we've got to get it written down before it's completely lost. Even he recognized that memorization wasn't good enough.
All right, okay.
Let me interject and ask a question, Dr. J. Can we be sure that the Quran is originated with Muhammad? Because I heard that recently a manuscript was discovered in United Kingdom which is older than the Quran itself. So can we be sure that the Quran was originated with a man called Muhammad?
Wow, this is going to take about an hour. Are you ready for this?
Oh, let's go.
This is a huge question
Yes,
that
Phil.
you're asking. You're talking about the Birmingham folios. These are two folios that were discovered in 2015 in Birmingham, in the Birmingham University Library. Just two pieces of paper. That's all they are. Just two pages, front and back, okay? Two folios. And on those folios are a Quranic text from Surah 18, 19, and Surah 20. Three surahs on those folios. And they did not belong in the manuscript that they were found in. They had a completely different style of writing and a completely different script. So they sent them down to Oxford to the radiocarbon dating lab. And they wanted to get these radiocarbon dated, right? Radiocarbon dating supposedly is very exact. Well, it turns out it wasn't very exact because it measured it by radiocarbon dating from 568 to 645. 568 is 2 years before Muhammad was born, to 645 is, well, Muhammad is a good 12 years after Muhammad died. Muhammad died in 632. So it precedes Muhammad's life and also post comes after Muhammad's death. The problem is the Quran was not canonized until 652. So it's 7 years before the Quran was even created in its final form. And that's why many Muslim scholars have not come and said this is actually from Muhammad. Can you see why? Because how can you have a text whose latest date, because with radiocarbon datings, it's very inexact. So it's roughly 100 years space, 568 to 645. And so obviously the Muslim scholars are keeping quiet about this because this means that there are two folios from a text that predates Uthman. Well, what's fascinating is they haven't only just radiocarboned those two folios. They've also radiocarboned the Sana'a manuscript, which is an even more famous manuscript that was discovered in the mosque in Sana'a in 1975. And they took those to not just London, not just to the Oxford lab. They took them to the lab in Kiel, to the lab in Lyon, and to a lab in Zurich, in Switzerland, in France, in Germany, and also in Britain. 4 different labs, 4 different European labs, considered the 4 most respected radiocarbon dating labs. And they radiocarbon dated the Sana'a manuscript in those 4 labs. Guess what dates they came up with? In all 4 labs, radiocarbon dating this portion of the Sana'a manuscript, they were getting from 390 AD up to 550 AD.
Wow.
Now, you see the problem there. If those radiocarbon dates are from 390 to 550, this is before Muhammad was even born. He was born in 570. This is before the Quran was revealed to him. That was begun in 610. This is before he even died. That was in 632. And this is before even Abu Bakr in 632 or Uthman even created or canonized the Quran in 652. So hundreds of years before Islam, before Muhammad, before the Quran, before Uthman, you have a radiocarbon dating of a text called the Sana'a, which is close to the Quran we have today. What does that tell you about radiocarbon dating?
Well, it must be, Quran must be before that. Like even those people said, his people even said, we know this before. This he's bringing some old people's tales and something like that. So
well, let me tell you what it is. That's true. That's one way of looking at it. That these are nothing more than borrowings. What I would suggest there's a much better thing, a much better response. What does radiocarbon dating? What is it testing? Is it testing the ink, or is it testing the material that the ink is written on?
Oh, I'm not sure about that. You can tell us.
Material.
It tests. Daniel's correct.
I think
it
it
only
is material.
tests when the animal. Remember, these are animal skins.
Okay.
These are parchment. This is vellum. These are animal skins. These are goat skins. These are deer skins. It tests only from the date that the animal died. Okay? Not when it was cured, not when it was created into a amenable force that a material that it could be written on. And it certainly does not test the ink, because you can't test ink. Why? Because ink, by definition, is amalgamation of many different pigments that come from many different places, from many different eras. It could be hundreds of years old, the ink. So that's why you can't test the ink. because it's too impermeable. Because by definition, to create an ink, you've got to put different concoctions from different places, from different bits of water, bits of liquid, bits of different spices and whatnot to create the color. That's why you never test ink, because it's so inexact. You can only test the material that it's written on. And the material could well be from 568 to 645. I have no doubt about that. But when it was written down, I would suggest you need to go to paleographical evidence. And what the Dr. Francois de Roche, the world authority on paleographic study of the Quran, he says these two folios don't belong to the manuscript that's in Birmingham. They actually belong to the manuscript that's in Paris, in the Bibliothèque Nationale, which he is responsible for. He recognized that they're the same writing, the same type of material, and from the same text that he has in his Bibliothèque Nationale there in Paris. And that is dated to 705. And later, it's dated to the 8th century. So using paleographical evidence, I would suggest that even the Birmingham folio, but you're still going to have a problem with the Sana'a manuscript. Why is the Sana'a manuscript is hundreds of years before Muhammad? Now, you could say, what you're saying, Abimelech, that this is possibly, these are nothing more than other pieces of red writing from other traditions. Remember, the Quran is borrowing stories. In fact, even the Birmingham folio, Surah 18, 19, and 20 are 3 stories that are borrowed. One is the story of the 7 sleepers in Ephesus. The other is the story of Moses that comes out of the Bible. So you can see that these are stories that would have been written long before the Quran. Could be that that's what it's measuring. I would suggest that even the Sana'a manuscript, if you're going to use radiocarbon dating, I would be very careful. Radiocarbon dating is too inexact. And more than that, it will give you the wrong evidence for supporting the wrong conclusions. That's why we need to ask, what do we know about the Quran from the 7th century? I'm doing a series of videos right now on Fander Films, and I've been doing it now for the last 2 or 3 weeks. And I've asked this question very simply. I'm asking, can anybody, anywhere, come up with any documentation from the 7th century? But I'm not just saying from the 7th century, I'm saying pre-690. That means pre-Abdul Malik, from prior to 690, that has any reference to Muhammad on it, that has any reference to the Quran on it, that has any reference to people called Muslims on it, that has any reference to a religion called Islam, and that has any reference to a city called Mecca. Those are the 5 things I'm asking. People have been sending me all kinds of artifacts, letters. They've been sending me all references on inscriptions, on rock inscriptions. In every case, I'm debunking every one of them. Not one of them is from the 7th century. And that's why I'm saying, is it no wonder that we have no Quran from the 7th century either? Because the earliest manuscripts that we have in our hand today, that includes the Topkapi, which is the manuscript that resides in Istanbul, there in the Topkapi Palace in Turkey, the Samarkand, which is in Tashkent in Uzbekistan, the Ma'il manuscript, which is housed in the British Library in London, the Petroponus manuscript, which is housed in the Bibliothèque Nationale in Paris that I was talking about earlier, the Husseini manuscript, which is housed in Cairo in Egypt, and the Sana'a manuscript, the 6 major manuscripts, the last one, the Sana'a manuscript, which is in Sana'a in Yemen. Those 6 manuscripts, not one of them is from the 7th century. They're all from the 8th and 9th century. Not one of them is complete. Not one of them agrees with each other completely, and not one of them agrees completely with the Quran that I have in my hand today. And we've known about this since 2014. We've known about this for 6 years. I did my debate with Dr. Shabir Ali in Toronto on those 6 manuscripts. He has yet to respond to any of those 6 manuscripts. So this has been around for 6 years. And that's why Muslims will not debate this subject anymore. How can you debate it? Because if you're going to debate, remember, we've always said that this idea of this religion called Islam that comes from a man named Muhammad, who lived and received a revelation from 610 to 632, that lived in a place called Mecca, then moved to a place called Medina, and then had all these wives, and then died in 632, controlling the central part of Arabia at that time. If that is so, why is it that everything we know about what I've just said comes from 200 to 300 years later? Nothing comes about this man living in that place, doing these things, receiving that book, or naming himself a Muslim, or be known as in Islam in a city called Mecca. We know nothing about that material, what Islam is, what they did, who he was, and what that book was at all from the 7th century. We can't find anything. Can you then understand why this is the million-dollar questions that Muslims are yet to respond to? So it's not just the Quran we're having problems. We're having problems with Muhammad himself. Who is Muhammad? I believe he did exist, but he was not living in Mecca. He did not move to Medina. It looks like the man that we're talking about lived 600 miles further north. Even what you said earlier, Abimelech, about his wives, look and see what it says about Abu Laban in Surah 111. Who is it that it's referring to there? Is Muhammad's name there?
No, it's
In
not.
all these stories in the Quran, is Muhammad's name found in the Arabic?
Only 4 times.
Only 4 times. Otherwise, he's known as the Prophet, the Nabi, the Rasulallah. Why is it they don't name him?
Not sure yet.
Okay, we could go on for a whole nother hour on this. I'm trying to keep it as capsulated, as simple as possible. But can you see everything we're looking in the Quran? If you want to look at the Quran, there are 65 different geographical locations, 9 different references to these 65 different geographical locations. Look and see where every one of those 65 locations are. They all are around Petra in Jordan. None of them are near Mecca. None of them are in Saudi Arabia. All these people that Muhammad, this prophet is talking to, he's not renamed Muhammad in any of these. The prophet is talking to the people from Ad, that's the tribe of Uz in the Bible. These people from Damun, those are the Nabateans that we know about in the Bible. These people from Midian, those are the Midianites. We know about the Midianites. We know about the Nabateans. We know about the Uz, people from Uz. They all are 600 miles further north. They all surround Petra. Not one of them is from Mecca. Look at all the mosques. Every one of the mosques, every mosque that we've been able to find up until 706, that's over 100 mosques have now been looked at. And all of those that precede 706, precede the 8th century, every one of them is facing Petra. As far away as Canton in China, as far away as Shadaman in Kerala in India, as far away as Syria and Jordan, all over the Middle East, up in Turkey, all of them are facing Petra. And they're within 2 degrees of accuracy. Ooh, nice.
Wow.
And you see, not one of them is facing Mecca. We can't find any mosque facing Mecca until 727. That's the early 8th century. We don't find any reference to a city called Mecca on any documentation until 741. That's the mid 8th century. We don't find Mecca on any map until 900 AD. That's the 10th century. Can you see then, when you look at the Quran and when you look at this faith, you will see that this book does not come from a man living in Mecca or that was starting a religion called Islam or even calling himself a Muslim. This book doesn't even appear until 705. Well, it may appear on a lower layer of the Sana manuscript in the last 2 decades of the 7th century. But that's only 60 verses. And yet there are 70 differences in those 60 verses with the Quran I have in my hand today. Ooh, it just gets worse and worse and worse. Thank God I don't have to follow that book.
Wow. So how is it first the Qibla to Mecca? How is it moved to there?
Yeah, this is a lovely, I love it, Abimelech. I mean, is this the first time you heard this?
Topic.
Oh.
Is this the first time you've heard this?
In history, so
yeah, I heard it
if
from
we
you.
go into that, it will take so much time. So let us come back to the Quran.
Right,
You read
okay.
That will be fine.
Read this book.
Because that is
What is that book?
long story. So
And read these 2 books. These 2 books
What is that book?
by Dan Gibson. This is called Quranic Geography.
All right, okay.
Dan Gibson, and this one's called Early Islamic Qiblas. This just came out in 2017. It's only been out 3 years. It is destroying the whole historicity for early Islam. Brilliant. But this guy spent 25 years doing his research, and he did not do it in the libraries. He went to every one of these mosques. He went to every one of these places. He learned the language, lived amongst the Bedouins, and actually did the measurements in situ. No one else has done what he's done. He's way ahead of everybody, and that's why the Muslims hate him. His name is Dan Gibson.
Yeah, I heard it about from you on some seminar.
Me and my friend translated the documentary video. Okay, let me speak, please. Me and my friend translated the documentary of Dr. Gibson into Amharic. Therefore, our Ethiopian friends can find it on the internet.
Brilliant. Now he's not a doctor. Just to be careful. He never did any. Never did any academic work. He did what all of us should do. He went onto the field and spent 25 years there studying it in situ using the language. But his name is Dan Gibson. He's a Canadian who has spent from 1979 to 2004 researching, but he hasn't stopped then. He's still going back every year, finding new mosques. And he's just destroying this notion that there was any man named Muhammad living in Mecca or in Medina and receiving a Quran and having the Qibla of all the mosques from 624 facing Mecca. Not one of them is facing Mecca, not until 727, over 100 years later.
Wow, that's very amazing. So, Daniel, do we have enough time to continue, or?
Yes, yes. There's one very important topic um, about the study of Dr. Dan Brubaker. I'm very interested in that. So, Dr. J, can you tell us what Dr. Brubaker has found about the early manuscripts of the Quran?
And this is probably a good way to end on, because this is by far the much more devastating material. Remember, we've been talking about ahruf and we've been talking about qira'at. Ahruf and qira'at are nothing more than diacritical marks. Take a look at this script here. Do you see any dots on that script there? Do you see any vowels? Nothing,
No,
right?
It's clear. I can't see any vowels or anything. It's just plain consonants.
It's just consonant. This is known as the razm. That's called the razm. That's the skeletal text we're talking about. All the earliest manuscripts are like this. Every one of them. The top copy, the Petropolitan, the Ma'il, the Huzayni, the Sana manuscript, and the Samarkand manuscript. They're all written like this. Well, written with a skeletal script, not with the same script. The script changes because of the way there's the Abbasid script, there is the Hijazi script. So they're different scripts, but they all have no dots. Now, you notice this word up here in the margin? You see that?
No. Yeah. Now
Yes,
I have been looking at them earlier.
I need to keep talking because otherwise they'll show it. See, can you see there's a word, dalika?
Yeah.
Over here.
Yes, on the margin, yeah.
On the margin. And take a look also, when you look at this book here, you'll see there's also a change there, and there's also a change here, and there's also a change there in a different ink. Can you see that? That's different ink, right?
Yes, in different
These are
ink.
corrections to the text. Now, what Dr. Dan Brubaker, he did his doctoral thesis on the Quranic text. He's the first in the world to do this. No one has ever dared to do what he has done. He wanted to look at the earliest manuscripts. Those are the 6 I named, plus about 4 others. And back in 2010, he started his doctoral thesis. Now, his intention was to go and look and see if he could find any corrections to the razm. These are not, there's no dots. So there's no correction to dots because dots hadn't been invented this early. So he was looking to see if there's any corrections to the consonantal text. He was hoping to maybe find 10, maybe 15, because even if you find one, that would destroy this notion that the Quran is complete and eternal and unchanged, right?
Yeah.
It would destroy the notion of eternality that you brought up earlier, Abamelech. It would destroy any hope of it having no human intervention. And it would destroy this idea that it has never changed. It's exactly the same Quran that we have today as that which exists in heaven, which you brought up at the beginning of the hour. He went to all these manuscripts, was given access to them. He was able to then photograph them, to look at them. He's the first in the world to do this, to actually look for this. He's done what the Muslims have been doing for 1400 years. Why didn't Muslims do this, first of all? Isn't that interesting? To date, no Muslim has done it. He's the only one. And he published this just last year. Now, in 2014, he got his doctorate on this thesis. At that time, he had found 800 of these corrections. Not 10, not 15, 800. That's when he and I got together and I did my debate with Dr. Shabir Ali, introducing those 800. That's all I had to do, is introduce those 800. And he's found erasers. He has found what we called insertions. He has found coverings. He has found where they have covered and then erased over top, or they've erased and they've written over top. He has found tapings, 7 different types of corrections he found. Wow. When I introduced that to Dr. Shabir Ali, the world authority on the Quran in the English language at that time, he could not come up with one response other than who cares? We know that it was memorized. We know that it
Yes,
has.
actually, it was surprising to hear that Dr. Shabir Ali admitting the Quran was corrupted and he was clinging to this number 19 miracle. And that was funny.
His only response was, look at these set of verses here, and you look at these set of verses and you have 19. Look at these set of words with these set of words, you get 19. Look at these surahs with these surahs, you get 19, 19, 19, 19. He spent 19 minutes. I timed the debate afterwards. He spent 19 minutes wasting our time. I finally turned to him and I said, what are you talking about when you look at these set of verses and these set of verses and these set of words? None of these manuscripts that we're looking at, these earliest manuscripts, have any verses. There's no versification. Versification was introduced much, much later, hundreds of years later. In fact, even today, we don't have the same versification. When I say chapter 4, verse 34, depending on what Quran you go to, chapter 4, verse 34 may be in verse 35, maybe verse 32. You have to read 5 verses up and behind to find out which verse I'm talking about. So there's no standardization even today with versification. But I said, look at any of these manuscripts. They're not even complete. So what are you talking about this number 19? Which manuscript are you referring to? Where did you get all these 19s from?
Exactly. That was an interesting question to ask him.
He finally had to admit it was the 1924 Hafs text.
Yeah.
It was the 1924 Hafs text, which is not even 100 years ago. And I said, this text has been in existence for less than 100 years. And this is what you're basing everything on?
Yeah.
I said, you haven't even dealt with what I'm saying today. Are you even hearing what I'm saying? The 1924 text is nothing more than ahruf and kirat. It's nothing more than vowelization and diacritical marks. I'm talking about the razm. I'm talking about the script.
Yeah.
I'm talking about this.
You're dealing with the manuscripts, and he was talking about something like something what happened
readings. He's talking about oral readings.
It's actually very childish.
This is nothing more than oral readings. That's all he knew. And this is their best debater. This is the best man they have in the Islamic world, in the English language, to support the Quran. He's got his doctorate in this area, and he didn't even know how to answer something as basic as that. And that was back in 2014. This is 6 years later. He still hasn't answered it. Can you then understand why this is probably the most devastating material? Now, this just came out a year ago, came out in May of 2019, almost exactly a year ago, May 26, I think it was. And what he has done, he's only taken 20. He has now found 4,000 of these corrections. 4,000. Did you hear me?
Yeah.
4,000 of these kind of corrections.
Wow.
And these are just simple examples. And you can go through this book. This is just the first 20. He just wanted to show 20 examples of the 4,000. When he published this in May, a year ago, this went right to the top of the Amazon.com, right into the most popular book that was being sold in Islam at that time. He has, so far, nobody has been able to refute him. Oh, there have been those who have tried. In fact, the best refutation came out just in 2019. December of 2019, and I can't remember off the top of my head who the man was that refuted him. And we looked at it, and Al-Fadi and I just ripped it to shreds. We just said, there's nothing here that's substantive. In fact, the author, who is actually a Westerner that lives very close to where I live right here, he's not too far from me. He is not even an expert. He doesn't have any degree in this area. He is a chemist, but he has tried to come up with a response, and he's not even a Muslim. And basically his conclusion is, who cares? We know that these were all scribal errors. We know that that's there. We know the Quran was manipulated. He actually admitted what Muslims don't want to admit as his response. And I said, are you listening to yourself? And he says, this is well known in scholarship. This is well known in academia. Dan hasn't shown us anything we don't already know. And I said, yeah, well, that's only 1% of all Muslims would admit to what you just said. 99% of all Muslims would be devastated by what Dan's found, because this proves that this has been manipulated, has been changed, has been accreted, has been deleted, has been corrupted over the last 1,400. Did I say 1,400? 1,300 years.
Wow.
That's why what Dan is finding, and he's coming out with his next book this month in May. The next one's coming out just on this manuscript one here, the one's on the cover. Wait till you see what he's got in that one. So he's going to be producing book after book after book now, come and making and going public with what we have now found about these not diacritical differences, nothing to do with dots, nothing to do with ahruf, nothing to do with kirat. These are razm. These are consonantal changes, intentional changes.
It's interesting because the change, even the dot change, disproves the Quran by itself. Even the dot change, because it's they believe it's the same as from eternal tablet, and the same as what Muhammad has got revealed, and what the same as what Uthman collected. So it will, if there is one dot change in the Quran, it will destroy the Quran by itself, even not even this manuscripts, I think. So
And let me just add. Let me just end with two things. One of which you brought up earlier, but a second thing. When a Muslim comes to you and says that these changes are nothing more than ahruf in qira, these are nothing more than readings. Ask them if there's, and it doesn't change the meaning, it doesn't change the text. If that is the case, then why did they have to then choose one in 1924 to be the official text? Why didn't they allow them all the other 39 to exist? And why did finally, in 1985, did they have to choose one text for the whole world? Why couldn't they go with all the other readings? What's wrong? Unless, of course, the readings change the meaning, and the meaning changes the theology. You just admitted why you had to standardize the text. Secondly, the question you brought up, and it's a brilliant question, Abba Malik. If Hafs was the one that was chosen, how did Muhammad ibn al-Husayni al-Haddad, one man who is a scholar there at Al-Azhar University in 1924, how did he know that this is the one that Muhammad knew, this is the one that Muhammad received, and this is the one that's in that tablet in heaven? Is that the Hafs text? And are you not giving credit to a young man who lived in 796 in Iraq greater than Muhammad himself? Because Muhammad didn't even know. He even admitted there were 7, according to the later traditions, which are written much too late to make sense. They don't even make sense. Can you then see why you can hammer Muslims on just those two questions? Throw it right back on their lap, say, you're not even dealing with the real problems. If you're saying that there were 7 ahruf, that's not in a written text. That's in the way you read it orally. This is not in a written text. But if you're saying that even Muhammad thought there were 7 ahruf, then he didn't understand Arabic. And he obviously, as we know, he was illiterate to begin with. So he had no idea what he was talking about. This is what al-Bukhari thought was the problem. And that's why Muslims today have no idea of the hole that they are digging by even answering it that way. Let them answer it that way. I will say proof again that this is man-made, man-manipulated, man-corrected, and still man-chosen. Everything is as man-made as you can get. And you finally got the right text in 1924. But that was only for one city. You finally got it for the whole world in 1985. That was 25 years ago. I'm older than the Quran. Boy, that makes me feel old.
That's amazing. It's interesting to hear that someone is older than the Quran and they believe it's eternal book of God. It's interesting in a way. So I think we shall end here because we had to get back to live again in Amharic. So Daniel, I think it's better to end here.
Yes, thank you, Dr. J. Smith. You are one of the best, if not the best, Christian apologists alive today, and we are glad to have you. I know that you love Ethiopia and Ethiopians, and I have seen you eating injera, and I hope one day we'll meet in person. And thank you. You are truly humble. It is unbelievable to get someone with such high profile on our show, and thank you so much. We thank you.
Daniel and Abimelech, it's been a pleasure being with you. There are many now who are learning this material. There are many of us who are communicating it. It's great that we're getting this into Ethiopia, and I'm glad for you two brothers. We are brothers in Christ. I can't wait to get back to Ethiopia again once this pandemic is over, and I can't wait to have Injera with both of you. God bless you. Next time in Addis.
Yeah.
Thank you, Dr. J.
Thank you. Thank you.
We hope we'll get you back another time with us here and different topic, and or it may be the same topic too.
Okay. God bless you. We'll see you in the next.
All right. Okay. Thank you very much. God bless you too.
Amen. Amen.